Tonight, the government pledges to overrule local concerns to build more prisons, but predicts that they will still fill up. Is there a viable alternative to locking people up? We speak to the Prisons Minister, who, as Chief Executive of Timpson's, pioneered the rehabilitation of offenders.
When people are punished, they need to go to prison. But what has been lacking over far too long is an addiction to rehabilitation. Because we need to have fewer victims, we need to have reoffending down.
Tractors return to Parliament, with farmers accusing the government of a betrayal over inheritance tax changes. But the Prime Minister stands his ground. Immigration takes centre stage at PMQs as Kemi Badenoch attacks Keir Starmer, but is confronted with record net migration under the last Conservative government. And as the new head of the Office for Value for Money gets to work, we revisit some of the most jaw-dropping examples of government not getting enough bang for its buck. All that and more with Baroness Sayeeda Warsi and Praful Nargund, guaranteed to deliver value for money tonight. It's Wednesday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. The government has announced today it's building more prisons so that it can lock 14,000 more people up if needed. After Labour was forced to let 3,000 prisoners out early when prisons almost reached capacity over the summer, it was clear they needed to do something. So building more prisons and creating more spaces, it is. It does make me think of a quote from the film The Shawshank Redemption when Andy Dufresne asks if he can have some money to build a prison library. And the prison governor responds, as far as I'm concerned, there's only 3 ways to spend the taxpayers' hard-earned when it comes to prisons: more walls, more bars and more guards. Of course, modern-day prisons are nothing like Shawshank, but there is still a lot of truth in the prison governor quote. You know, when taxes are at record highs and schools and hospitals are crying out for cash, it's pretty hard to make the case for more money for the softer end of rehabilitation. On tonight's show, I've interviewed the Prisons Minister, James Timpson, the prison reformer, former boss of Timpson's, who once said, "We need a government that's brave, that's prepared to take the politics out of prisons, prepared to accept we can't afford to build billions of pounds worth of prisons to house more people." What does he think now? We'll find out later on the programme. But first, here is Sky's Molly Malone with tonight's report on this.
For much of this year, our prisons have been almost full, facing a capacity crisis.
Just so busy.
And so the government are building 14,000 more cell spaces. But even after that, today an admission, they'll run out of room.
It's still not enough, and so we are going to have to do things differently in this country.
But doing things differently doesn't address the now, the current capacity. Sky News can reveal that right across the country, thousands of cell spaces at 28 different jails are set to be taken out of circulation because they're not safe to house people. Ranging from problems with fire safety at HMP Swaleside in Kent to security issues in Manchester and repair work at HMP Humber.
Some cells might be out of action, like there is no water, or the toilet is probably broken.
We spoke anonymously to a serving prison officer about the population pressures and what it means in reality.
In the morning, when prisoners go out to the courts, we release them. We get spaces, and then by the evening, we get pressure from the governor to clear out the cells, to double up the cells. Prisoners are the ones who are losing the battle. I don't think prison helps in rehabilitating prisoners. We're just housing them, feeding them, keeping them alive.
And so ministers say they want to change what prison does for offenders in the future. But still, they have a crisis on their hands.
The government have a big balancing act. Right now, it's all about cell space. Do they have enough room in prison to house people today and in future years, as the prison population looks set to continue to grow? But really, they want to be having a much bigger conversation with the upcoming sentencing review about who we're sending to prison, for how long, and what alternative forms of punishment outside prison could look like.
That review is being led by the former Conservative Justice Secretary, David Gauke.
What we want to do with the sentencing review is put the prison population on a sustainable footing. It has increased hugely in recent years. It's essentially doubled since 1993 and is forecast to increase by 4,500 a year for the years ahead. Now, that is not sustainable.
A ballooning prison population, building plans that are already billions over budget, prisoners being released early. The crisis still very immediate. Molly Malone, Sky News.
Well, Sky's Deputy Political Editor Sam Coates is here. And Sam, today they're talking about forcing prisons through the planning system. Planning is really at the heart of a lot of this, isn't it?
Half of the new places that Shabana Mahmood is talking about are coming from new prisons, from Buckinghamshire to Yorkshire. They're talking about building afresh. But that's not without complications. Perhaps not surprisingly, some people object to having new prisons in their backyard. Some of the objections that existed that you were able to make in the past are going to be removed in order to force through these prisons. And that's part of a bigger and wider theme of this week. It was going to be building week, really, in government until foreign affairs and what's been going on in Syria slightly took attention away from that. But that culminates tomorrow with Angela Rayner and Keir Starmer launching basically the finalised national policy planning framework. This is a big document that sets out the obligations, particularly for local councils, in order to get through more housing, essentially, in order to meet the government's milestone of 1.5 million new houses by the end of the Parliament. And it is a big deal. They'll be looking to enshrine the new housing targets for every council. They'll be looking to define what they call the grey belt. They're trying to push the edge of the green belt in order to get new planning and really just sort of tweak the rules in order to make sure things do move at pace. But, Sophie, this is a monstrously complex area. Planning and infrastructure is held up by a combination not only of councils being slow, but also endless judicial review, the fact that there are consultations required with loads of different bodies, and actually building in new areas requires looking hard and not breaking habitat and environment regulations. The question is, government's doing some of the easier stuff in time. Will it actually tackle the things that developers and people who are interested in growth say are the real problem?
Yeah, that's going to be so interesting to see, isn't it, Sam? Sam, thank you very much indeed. Sam Coates there, our Deputy Political Editor. Well, I spoke to the Prisons Minister, Lord Timpson, a little earlier today. Now, you might not know him to look at him, but you will probably know the company that he ran until the summer and which bears his family name. Now, he was brought into government to do the prisons brief because of his record in helping offenders when he was running Timpson's. 10% of that workforce were former offenders. So I was interested to see whether he was bringing that approach into government. Thank you so much for being on the programme. I'm very excited to speak today about such an important issue. So, prisons are full, so you're building more prisons, is that it?
Yeah, so we inherited a problem in July, which was the prisons were at 99.9% full. We had one day where we had less than 100 spaces, and that's dangerous. So we've got to build more prisons. The previous government should have built more prisons, but they didn't. So we've now got a plan in place to deal with the capacity, but this is not going to solve all of our problems, but prisons need to be built, and we need to build them quickly.
Can I be honest with you? It feels slightly weird to hear you say we need more prisons, prisons need to be built, because obviously you've spoken an awful lot before about how we're sending too many people to prison. You know, you said we're addicted in February, we're addicted to sentencing, we're addicted to punishment, we need a government that's brave. We need a government that's prepared to accept we can't afford as a country to build 4 to 6 billion worth of prisons to house more people. So what's gone on?
So I'm really clear that it's really important we have prisons. We need more prisons because when people are punished, they need to go to prison. But what has been lacking over far too long is an addiction to rehabilitation, because we need to have fewer victims. We need to have reoffending down. So it's not just about putting more people into prison, which we need to do. That's really, really important, because the net increase a year is 4,500 extra people in prison, and it's going to take us a long time to turn that curve. That's why we essentially need more prisons. I
mean, no one would disagree about rehabilitation, right? You know, that has to go in partnership with punishment, with prisons. But again, you know, I guess I just come back to the point of it doesn't feel to me like you're someone who has always thought that more prisons is the answer. So in February, you asked what you'd reform about our system, and you said that you would look to Holland, where they've shut half of their prisons. I mean, I thought you'd be someone who'd be shutting prisons, not building them.
The fact is we're in this situation now. We've inherited this crisis. The prison population is going up, and we need to deal with that. So that's why we need to build more prisons. They need a place. But one of the things that has been lacking is too many people are leaving prison when they've still got addiction problems, mental health problems. They don't have a job, they don't know where to live. And that is why there's so much reoffending. 80% of offending is reoffending. That's why the prisons are getting so full, is because of people not getting, they're leaving prison as better criminals, not better citizens, and that's not right. And that has been my passion. What can we do to turn this around? But it's going to take a long time. But to get there, we need to build more prisons. If you use international examples, Holland is a really good example. Let me give an example about in Texas. So in Texas, 14 years ago, they decided they still need to, they need to build more prisons, but they couldn't afford to keep building more and more and more. So they changed strategy. Crime is now down 30%, and they've shut 16 prisons. Similar things have happened in Spain. Similar things have happened in Louisiana.
So would you like to be shutting prisons at some point? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not even thinking about closing prisons. What I'm thinking about is building more. What I am thinking about is how can we stop reoffending? How can, when these people leave prison, can they be in a job with somewhere to live, and they've turned their lives around? And that's why I was so pleased to get this job, because I've been passionate about this for 25 years, and this is his opportunity to help these people so when they leave prison, we don't get more victims.
One of the first things the Labour government did when they came into power was to let out prisoners, right? And that, of course, was because prisons were full, or that's what you said. It was obviously at a time when the probation service was also under serious strain, and there were real fears about what this would mean. Were you worried about letting these people out early?
Well, we were worried from day one about the increasing prison population, and then obviously we had the riots over the summer, which put in, even more pressure on. So we had to do some emergency measures, and so we inherited a scheme. We won't go into the details. We inherited a Tory scheme, which is basically just letting people out in a rush, and over 10,000 people were let out like that. The reoffending rates were really, really high, so we didn't want that.
The question is, were you worried when you were letting people out early?
No, because we had a completely different strategy. We had an 8-week lead-up time. We really engaged with probation, all the accommodation staff, and what we found is the reoffending rates of people who left on our emergency release is no different from it was before. So,
So what, really high still? Because it was high anyway.
Yeah, and but I think my colleagues in the Ministry of Justice done an amazing job, because we asked an awful lot of them, and they came up with the goods.
The former Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick, told Sky News this morning that over his dead body would dangerous people who should be in jail be out on the street. What do you say to him?
Well, I agree. Prison is for dangerous people, and that is what it's for.
But he's saying that you let these people out early. That would happen over his dead body. He's saying.
Well, we didn't let out any dangerous people. We had a number of exemptions. No one who served sentences over 4 years for violent offences and so on. There's a long list of exemptions, of which the Tories, of which he was in, had no exemptions at all. So I think it's very unfair to say that.
You mentioned a bit earlier about the inheritance that you had, and then the additional pressure that the summer riots put on prison places. A lot of people will be looking at this thinking, look, you're kind of letting criminals out of jail early. At the same time, 350 people serving time in jail because of their role in the summer riots. And they'd be thinking, is that fair? Is that right? Is there a two-tier justice system going on? Do you think that jailing so many people over the summer riots was the best use of prison capacity?
Well, it's up to our independent judiciary what they decide to sentence people.
I can ask you, though, what do you think?
What I think is if people have committed crimes and the judges decide them to go to prison, we need prison places for them. I'm really, really clear about that.
OK, but what about the summer riots? You don't have an opinion on that, then?
What I have an opinion on, it was a dreadful series of events, and I think the police did an incredible job with the judiciary to act really, really quickly. And the people who committed crimes need to go into prison. But when they're in prison, what's really important is we do all we can to help them so they don't come back again.
The other issue that I wanted to talk to you about, and look, it's always hard in a short interview, there's so much, to be honest, that I want to talk to you about when it comes to prisons and the justice system and all those things, is the issue of babies in prison. Because I feel like quite a lot of people would be quite shocked to hear that there are babies born in prison or babies who are looked after in prison because of, obviously their mums have been jailed when they're really, really small. How can that be right? Do you think babies should be in jail?
It's a really difficult area. When I was a kid, my mum was a foster carer, and she used to foster a lot of the babies whose mums were in prison. So I used to spend a lot of time sitting outside Style Women's Prison while my mum took the babies in on a visit. So it's something I find it's a really complex problem. The fact is that the best place for a baby is with their mother. But unfortunately, when their mother is in prison, it causes lots of problems. I've been to a number of mother and baby units in prisons, and the staff do an amazing job. helping the mums and their babies. But but one of the challenges I have is that there are amazing volunteers at Style that go in and take the babies out for a couple of days a week, so they get used to normal life. Take them to the supermarket and so on. There's a very small number of babies in prison with their mothers, but I think it's an area that hopefully the Women's Justice Board will be looking at as well. So we start that in January, and the number of areas that we're going to cover. So we need to look at that.
So it's something that you think you'd like to look personally at, is it?
It's something I think we really need to look at, because what I'm really focused on is what is the right thing for women in prison. 80% of women are in prison for non-violent offences, and I'm sure when you've been into women's prison, you'll see there are a lot of people who need to be there. There's also a lot of people who are actually very ill, and it's a case.
You don't need to be there, you think?
Well, I think there are a number of there who we should have diverted earlier on in their criminal time away from custody. Because a lot of women in prison are victims themselves, and we need to make sure that prison is for the right people. And and the Women's Justice Board, I think, is the right format to really look at all that.
Well, it'd be great to sort of speak. It's obviously something that you're looking into. It'd be good to potentially talk to you about it a bit more in the future. I also wanted to ask about the Reform UK MP James Murdoch. Now, court documents show that he was convicted in 2006 for repeatedly kicking his girlfriend. Someone is part of disputed the details of that case. But I wanted to ask you about it because I talked to Richard Tice about it this week, and he said, we live in a Christian nation. We believe in redemption. You've done your bit, you've done your sentence, you move on. I think that's a great thing. Do you agree with Richard Tice, or do you have any issues with James Murdoch remaining an MP?
I don't know anything about the case, but what I do know is that when prisons work well, they can rehabilitate people. But it's not just about what the prison can do, it's what the offenders can do themselves. And there are a number of people who leave prison and go on to have fantastic lives. They form loving relationships, they have jobs, they're colleagues of yours probably and mine. But there are too many people who are just reoffending over and over again.
Do you think Parliament should lead the way in employing more ex-offenders? Well,
it's a conversation I'm having with colleagues across the whole public sector. As an example, the public sector is a huge employer, and the Ministry of Justice, for example, does employ people with prison experience, not in every role, in very sort of specific roles, and people with lived experience can contribute some really good insight into certain policy areas. But there are other areas where it's not really right for those kind of people. But
it's something you should look at, you think, that would be good?
I think from a Timpson example, I've for the last 20-odd years been recruiting people from prison. Hasn't always gone right. Recruited some people, it's all gone wrong. But over time, we learned that when you find the right people at the right time in their life, they can make really good colleagues and turn their life around.
And just finally, because I know you've got to go, but just finally, you obviously have vast experience in the prison sector. You've also got experience in business. We always think that, in the job that you've done previously, you kind of pull a lever and something happens straight away. An awful lot of people tell me that there's a lot of inertia in government, that you just can't get things done, that the system isn't built for it. Have you found any of those frustrations yourselves?
Well, I've got a very different job. When I was running the Timpson business, it was about great service, looking after my colleagues and making a profit. Now it's about reducing reoffending, fewer victims and running our prisons and probation really well. So although it's different, there are lots of similar skills I hope I can bring to it. I know how to run complex organisations. A lot of my friends have said, oh my God, you must be really frustrating. It's not. I'm getting loads done. The colleagues I work with are so passionate. And I think one of the things...
Not just because they're in the room.
Not because they're in the room. But one of the things I really hope is that the enthusiasm and experience that I have, and also the longer-term plan we've got, all the team are saying, oh, brilliant, we've been waiting. This is why I joined the civil service to do something like this. I've been waiting for 15 years. So I don't want to let them down, and I don't want to let victims down and everybody else, but I do believe we've got this opportunity, and I'm loving it. It's hard work, especially over the summer when we had all the problems with prison capacity. But it's just a massive privilege, and I just want to get it right.
OK, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Just wanted to bring you some breaking news now from the United States, because the FBI Director, Christopher Wray, has just told a town hall of FBI employees that he's going to resign. That coming in from NBC News. FBI Director Christopher Wray saying he is going to resign. Donald Trump signalled his intention to fire him and replace him with a loyalist, Kash Patel, even though he, of course, appointed Christopher Wray in 2017. Their relationship seemed to sour after those FBI agents conducted a court-approved search of his house in Florida in 2022 over classified documents he'd allegedly taken and retained while in office. But that news coming in, Christopher Wray resigning as director of the FBI. Right, let's bring in our duo this evening, shall we? The former Conservative Cabinet Minister Baroness Sayeeda and Praful Nargund, who is Labour Councillor and Director of the Good Growth Foundation. Great to have you both on the programme this evening. Right, so we're talking prisons. We just heard there from Lord Timpson. Sayeeda, what's your take on this? Because it does feel to me like this is one of our real crisis points at the moment.
It is, and I think what's really positive about James, and when he's said this for many years, it's time to take politics out of this. This isn't something that we should be beating our chests over, pretending who's tougher. What it should be about is whether or not we can stop people reoffending, whether we can stop people going into prisons. We shouldn't actually, in the end, be asking for a larger prison estate. We should, in the end, be fighting for fewer prisoners. I think it's great that the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, has appointed David Gork to conduct the sentencing review, who's an ex-Conservative Justice Minister, because this has got to be a combination of having the prison estate to have the prisoners right now, but in the long term, looking at how sentencing can be reformed, looking at how rehabilitation can work, looking at the support mechanisms, the kind of things that James's firm do by making sure that there is an opportunity for a job and some stability and some money and accommodation when you leave. For many years, I was a criminal defence lawyer, and my biggest challenge when many of my clients would come out was to stop them from reoffending. And the reason that they did reoffend was because they would come back to nothing. They would come back to no family, no support, no accommodation, no job. So I think if we can get the rehabilitation in prison right, and we can get the support mechanism on the outside right, then I would love to see a moment in British politics when we're not spending, scarce public finances on building more prisons. Actually, we're closing down prisons.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I don't know what you think, but you listen to James Timpson there and what he's talking about with rehabilitation, and also what he's said previously, about looking to Holland, where they've been shutting down prisons, looking to, women's prisons. Are we sending too many people there? And yet he is out there fronting a policy which is to build more prisons. I mean, does it sound a bit disappointing, I guess, to some people on the reform side?
Well, I mean, look, there's clearly a crisis in overcrowding in prisons as well as crumbling infrastructure. I mean, when we had a situation where, the prison system was on the verge of collapse over the summer, it's extreme. And so clearly there is an immediate problem that has to be tackled. The numbers are going to continue for a while longer. But we do need a paradigm shift, exactly as you just described. We give up on people too easily in this country, whether it's exclusions in schools, which end up as a pathway to prison, or those who don't get rehabilitation when they're in prison and end up reoffending and back in, bolstering the numbers. I mean, last year, in a role I do around skills, I visited the North East, a Green Skills boot camp. Many of the trainees were ex-offenders. And in 6 weeks, they were getting training that would get them a well-paid job in a booming new industry. That's good for society, good for rehabilitation, and good for the economy too. So they have to address the problem that exists right now. It is very extreme, but we need to fight for a change in mindset. I'm
interested in your own experience, Sayeeda, as a barrister, and what you must have seen there, the court system, the justice system, which of course goes hand in hand with prisons. Do you think we send too many people to prison then?
I think I had many clients for whom prison wasn't the right place. But then I also had clients actually who probably should have gone to prison and didn't. And this is where sentencing can be so hit and miss. And I think that it's important for us, one, to identify where, of course, you have to punish offenders. When they commit crimes, there has to be a punishment at the end of it. But part of that has got to be punishment for the crime that you've committed, but rehabilitation to ensure that you don't commit a crime again. again, because the best legacy for victims would be for there not to be another victim. And I think that's why we have to say that the toughest way that you can be tough on crime is to ensure that it doesn't happen and to ensure that those that have been in the criminal justice system don't enter it again. And I genuinely we want to take the politics out of this, because at a time when public finances are overstretched, building prisons, a necessity now, is not what we should be spending taxpayers' money on.
It's interesting with the spending as well, though, isn't it? Because you were talking about the crisis before. I think that most people would say it does look really, really difficult, and yet isn't that partly because the Ministry of Justice has been starved of money, and Labour are probably going to do the same thing?
Well, I mean, clearly these have multiplier effects, right? But the reality is, with this announcement, they're still talking about reforms and changes with sentencing, which would mean, potentially alternative forms of punishment, more productive forms of training, and other things that might be accessible. So, I think the devil will be in the detail when the sentencing review happens. But I think, look, this has to happen because there is a deep crisis. We literally have prison places which are overflowing.
OK, thanks both very much indeed. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, hundreds of tractors block off Westminster as farmers take to the streets once again. But will the latest protests actually force a government U-turn on inheritance tax?
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest and Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them.
Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything, it's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island.
The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out. The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here.
In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Hello, welcome back. Well, farmers brought Westminster to a standstill today, driving tractors slowly past Parliament in a second protest against the changes to inheritance tax that the Chancellor announced at the budget. In the Commons, the Lib Dem leader Ed Davey urged Keir Starmer to change course and recognise the vital role that British family farms play. But the Prime Minister insisted once again that the vast majority of farmers would not be affected by the changes. Sky's business and economics correspondent Gurpreet Narwan reports.
The country has come to town. With a mile-long row of tractors that brought Westminster to a standstill. Farmers are still protesting the government's inheritance tax changes. And they're not going away quietly. They began early on farms like this one in Berkshire.
We can live without electricity, but we cannot live without food. And so much land will be sold off, which will never be farmed anymore.
But it's also about family and heritage.
I'm fighting for the survival of my farm, my daughter's futures. We have all worked very hard to keep this farm. My parents and my uncles were poor in the 70s due to high taxation. And now I'm facing the same thing, same Armageddon.
This row of tractors stretches all the way back to Trafalgar Square. It's clear that the government has underestimated the depth of anger its budget has caused. Over a month after it was unveiled, and protesters from across Britain's rural communities are still descending on Westminster. The Chancellor is holding firm, but the government's efforts to quell the anger are failing. But it's giving it a go.
We put £5 billion into farming over the next 2 years. That's a record number under the budget. Last week alone, £350 million to support farmers in the United Kingdom. In relation to inheritance tax, the vast majority of farmers will be unaffected, despite the fear-mongering of the party opposite.
The farmers aren't buying it.
They don't care what we think. They don't care about what the British public think.
I really don't know what we're going to do, but I have no hope, no faith in this government at all.
Ministers have started preparing for an escalation. The fear is that farmers could go on strike, leading to shortages on the shelves.
I can't rule it out. The public have done absolutely nothing wrong. We absolutely have to have their support, and I really don't want them to get caught in the eye of this storm. So making sure that we don't cut off their supplies and that we keep the public on side is essential to making sure that government have to listen.
Labour's rural problem has reared its head once more. Without a breakthrough, it could soon become everyone's problem. Gurpreet Narwan, Sky News.
Coming up next on the Politics Hub, we'll get a reaction to that from our panel. Plus, Keir Starmer pledged to stop the boats by smashing the people smuggler gangs, but over 20,000 boats have made perilous channel crossings since the election, and the asylum backlog is soaring. So a good topic for Kemi Badenoch at PMQs, perhaps? We'll find out. And as the head of the Office for Value for Money speaks about his new role for the first time, we thought we'd give him a few pointers with a look at when government spending went slightly over budget. Hello, welcome back. Well, before the break, we were looking at the second round of Westminster protests by farmers against the government's changes to inheritance tax. And we can bring in Sayeeda and Praful to discuss this a bit more. Look, I know you're kind of relatively well-behaved on Labour issues, but given the fact you're not a current MP, maybe you can kind of tell us what you really think on it. What do you think of the inheritance tax on farmers? Do you think it's something that the government should look again on, or are you supportive of it?
So, I mean, I really don't think this is something they should change their plan on. I mean, look, it's targeted at the wealthiest estate owners, not farmers, at landowners who have fairly large estates. It's still a very, very generous relief. That's the other thing that isn't being talked about, you know. It's still under the normal inheritance tax level. Still, there are very generous reliefs. You know, a couple would be able to pass on 3 million. And the 7-year rule continues to apply. And we were just talking about prisons. We have a crisis across the public realm. We do need to raise money if we're going to fix the NHS, and that does require difficult decisions. And actually, you know, in the role that I have at the Good Growth Foundation, you know, we commissioned a focus group recently, and I heard people talking about feeling like the changes in inheritance tax are a bit of fairness finally coming into the system, that the wealthiest are paying their fair share. So, of course, it's difficult, but it remains generous. And there's lots of evidence that it's only potentially a few hundred estates a year. So given the hard choices, I think it's one they should stick to.
What's your take on it?
Well, you know me well enough, Sophie, that I often come on this programme and even as a Conservative will end up defending Labour policies. Yeah. But on this, Labour are wrong. They're wrong on the basic principle of inheritance. You know, if you work hard and you save and you want to save and pass on to your future generations, we should be looking at ways in which people pay less inheritance tax, not more. And in the last budget, we found both in relation to pensions and in relation to the farming community, inheritance tax was really the hammer that was used to try and bring in more money. Secondly, specifically in relation to farming, there's so much detail which is being lost. This is not about actually hitting the wealthiest farmers. There were two kinds of relief that were offered to farmers to pass on family farms. One was the agricultural property relief and one was the business property relief, and each of them was individually claimed. So you could basically pass on your land and then you could pass on your combine harvester. So you had reliefs for both of them. What the government did was not only reduce the overall limit that you could claim, it amalgamated these two reliefs, and by doing that it reduced the amount of money you could pass on. So what we were saying to farmers is, yes, you might be able to pass on your fields to your kids, but you can't pass on the machinery that's required to work in the fields, which basically means you are effectively damaging family farms. And what they've also done is that the most wealthiest farms, estates, are still exempt because these are considered to be, if you basically say you have a huge estate and you know you have a shoot on the estate and you effectively say that, look, for cultural and heritage purposes, I've listed this building as a cultural and heritage site, then effectively you are exempt. So the wealthiest estate holders are still going to be exempt, but actually the family farms are going to be hit. And I genuinely think that, look, often in budgets, governments get it wrong. When I was in government, we got things wrong in the budget. And this is the kind of thing that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves need to look at again, because I think the damaging impact of inheritance tax per se and the damaging impact on farmers, I think, is too great.
What would you say to that?
Well, I think, you know, in many ways, I think it misjudges where the public are at. You know, a quarter of adults in this country wouldn't be able to afford an unexpected bill of £850, let alone duties on death, on inheritance. So, you know, in these set of circumstances, when actually many rural communities voted for Labour at the last election, and a big part of that was around seeing a restored public realm, getting public services back on their feet.
Isn't that a problem for Labour, though, right? Because you're right, a lot of these rural constituencies that previously went Conservative, many of them quite marginal, you're going to need those votes, aren't you? And I have to say, you know, all these tractors going past Parliament might not be the best look.
Well, I mean, the devil will be on whether public services improve. The devil will be in that detail, whether or not actually the public services improve over the next few years. You know, that's the key test. That's what people voted for, and that's what we have to watch and see.
Okay. But also, I think what I don't like to see is when the Prime Minister stands at the dispatch box and says we're going to be giving X millions to farmers over the next few years. You know, the best way in which you encourage people to kind of produce, farm and run their businesses, it's not by giving them handouts. is by actually getting out of the way. So what you can't do is say, we're going to make it difficult for you to pass these businesses, which is what they are, onto your families to carry on running their business and producing the food, but we'll give you a few handouts. And that, I think, is a very Labour way, and it doesn't work.
OK, thanks both very much indeed. Now, borders and immigration dominated Prime Minister's questions today, the day after the Home Secretary announced plans to work more closely with Germany to prosecute people smugglers. But with 20,000 small boat crossings since Labour came to power, the government's under pressure over how to stop the boats. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch said the Labour government was a pull factor for illegal migrants.
A man who arrived by small boat told Sky News he was happy Labour were in power. That man said the Conservatives, and I quote, wanted to deport us, but Labour are making the procedure easier for us. He's right, isn't he?
Well, that quote read out by Kemi Badenoch was from Wahag, a 24-year-old asylum seeker. It is important to note the context, though. He was a resident in a hotel that was targeted by rioters in Hull in the summer and watched the attack from the third floor as people threw stones at the hotel. He was speaking to our correspondent, Becky Johnson.
The previous government, they wanted to deport us, but now they make the procedure easier for us.
So you like the Labour government? Yes. OK.
Well, our chief political correspondent John Craig is here. If I can get my words out. John, what did you make of PMQs?
I think that's what the lawyers would call a leading question, isn't it? That last question. I was surprised this afternoon that Kemi Badenoch went on immigration rather than on the farmers, which was the big story of the day. So she missed the opportunity to get her words onto the radio and television news bulletins in the evening. It was left, as we heard in Gurpreet's report, it was left to Ed Davey of the party leaders to raise the farming issue. I thought Ed Davey played it pretty well. He had a serious question about Syria, and then his second question, he gets two, on the farmers. And we saw Ed Davey shaking his head in response to Sir Keir Starmer's answer. There was a Tory backbencher, Jerome Mayhew from Norfolk. He asked about the farmers as well. Now, some people I've spoken to this evening have said that Kemi Badenoch is being very badly advised. If you're the leader of the opposition, you need to go on the big story of the day. I mean, I can think of party leaders, opposition leaders over the years who've always done that, get their words on the TV bulletins and so on. She didn't do that. Now, her supporters would no doubt say, but she's building a case against the Labour government on immigration. Now, right at the beginning, she did say, Prime Minister doesn't want to talk about immigration because, of course, he didn't last week. And so she said, right, I'm going to tackle you on immigration. And, of course, she mentioned various examples of what Sir Keir had done, both as DPP, Director of Public Prosecution, and also when he was a human rights lawyer. He got a little bit riled about that. I quite like his line about her terrible jokes, because they are pretty corny. She needs a better joke writer. Really... I think when he can actually, and he did come back quite strongly defending his record when he was DPP, and I was quite surprised when he said, well, I was even praised by Theresa May, the former Home Secretary. So I'm not sure she, not for the first time, I'm not sure she got it quite right. But I can see what her thinking is. Keep hammering Labour on migration, because it's what our supporters, the Conservative supporters, care about. And, of course, she's got, from her right flank, she's got reform absolutely snapping at her heels and, according to the opinion polls, a real threat.
OK, thank you very much indeed. John Craig there, our chief political correspondent. Well, that row at PMQs may well feature in tomorrow's papers as well. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Daily Mail's Whitehall editor, Claire Ellicott. Right, let's get some thoughts of Sayeeda and Praful, should we? Sayeeda, I'm interested in your take on Kemi Badenoch. We just heard from John there saying that he thought perhaps she should have gone on farming. Is there a risk that she's, I guess, getting a bit lost with, reform outflanking her on one side, and then Labour, of course, well, you've got the levers of government, right? So you can actually make things happen, and that obviously gets you in the news.
Yeah, I mean, John is absolutely right on this, because the hardest thing as leader of the opposition, and when you're in opposition, is to get headlines. The hardest thing is to be heard. And on the day when the whole of Westminster was listening to those tractors blowing their horns outside, the easiest way to be heard was to actually be in tune with what they were talking about. And the Conservative position on inheritance tax on farms is very, very strong. I mean, it's the case that I've just been making. So that is the case that she should have been making. And, what I keep saying is we made immigration a huge priority at the last election. It didn't serve us well because it didn't win us the election. What it did do is it served reform well. So when the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition go head-to-head on this issue, neither they nor we win. The only people who win are reform. And so therefore we carry on ratcheting this up. We're 4 years away from an election. This is not the kind of thing that she needs to be focusing on. And it genuinely sounded like today she was almost in a kind of parallel tinkering beneath the bonnet when she should have been talking about the big issues of the day, and it was left to Ed Davey to do that.
How do you think she's doing as leader?
I mean, I think she's got incredible presence at the dispatch box. I think there's something in the way that she handles herself. I think the tone, I think she commands the chamber, all of the kind of things that often have been difficult for leaders of the opposition. I just think she's focusing on the wrong issues. And it's also quite difficult sometimes to listen to what she is saying when we have to accept with humility that our track record was not great on these issues. When immigration has been out of control, when we haven't managed to process quickly enough, when we haven't been able to stop the boats, when all the things that we said we were going to do, when we haven't been able to meet the targets that we have said, I think what you start by doing is showing a level of humility about where we got it wrong and what we would like the government to now do. And I just think that today's performance was just not it.
I was listening to what Sayeeda was saying there about how the previous Conservative government focused on immigration and then they kind of got hammered by it because the numbers went up, right? They failed to deal with it and to do what they said they wanted. And it did get me thinking how, it is quite perilous for Labour too, right? Because, Keir Starmer says that he wants to talk about immigration, they want to get numbers down. But then if numbers do keep going up, we saw 20,000 votes since Labour's been in power, then that's what Labour will be judged on as well, right?
I mean, it's very difficult. I mean, look, instinctively, I'm very supportive of the contribution immigrants make to this country. And I come from an immigrant family myself. My parents came to work in the NHS. But it is undoubted that for a large section of the electorate, trust and confidence has been lost in the system. And actually, some of those numbers that were set as targets before have contributed to that. And I think that's part of the reason why numbers aren't being set again, because it is actually just so difficult to deliver it. I mean, we've had chaos, we've had loss of control, and actually a lack of joined-up thinking around the effect that, large-scale immigration has on public services, for example. And just an example, what was it, a couple of weeks ago? The ONS revising their figures by 150,000. Yeah. What message does that send to the public at large that we really have a handle on borders? And look, I think there have been some changes already, deportation flights are actually taking place. On legal migration in particular, the economy has become so reliant on people coming from the outside. So if you do want to bring legal migration down, which they've said again and again and again, you really do have to have a bit of a skills revolution in this country. And that's a big, big challenge, given circumstances.
It's interesting what you said there about how you're kind of instinctively, kind of pro-migration, is that fair to say? Or because of your experience with your parents coming able to work in the NHS as public sector workers, and obviously bearing in mind what we say well about the need to have control over numbers as well. Are you uncomfortable sometimes with the tone the debate is taking?
Well, I think it very much comes up actually in focus groups and in polling that it is a very salient issue. People see the challenges in the cost of living, they see the challenges in public services, and actually the lack of control, the chaos, makes them feel very insecure. And there is a big challenge around insecurity across a whole range of different areas. And that's why it is important to restore it. If you want to have a sensible conversation about immigration, a system where we can think around what will help the economy, where we can have a more kind and caring asylum and refugee process, we have to take this trust and confidence issue on. If we don't deal with that, as a country, we'll never be able to have a sensible conversation.
OK, thanks both very much indeed. Still to come on The Politics. It's a tough job, but someone's got to do it. The head of the new Office for Value for Money gave evidence to the Treasury Select Committee today, speaking about his role for the first time. So we thought we would look at times when Westminster went over budget.
Coming up on the UK Tonight today with me, Matt Barbett, Sarah Sharif's father and stepmother are both found guilty of the 10-year-old's murder after years of abusing her. I'll be talking to the Children's Commissioner for England about why opportunities to protect Sarah were simply missed by the authorities. And we'll hear from one of the farmers who has brought London to a standstill with their protest over inheritance tax today. All that and more on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks. I'm live in Jerusalem. Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We not Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor. Free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, it must rank as one of the toughest jobs in government, the head of the new Office for Value for Money. David Goldstone gave evidence to the Treasury Select Committee today, speaking about his role for the first time. But look, he probably isn't going to need to look very hard to find a wealth of examples of times that government didn't make the optimum use of taxpayers' money, and that's putting it kindly. We've got a few examples to hand, so we thought if we'd see whether our panel could guess how much some of these projects cost. And we're going to start off with this, with HS2. Obviously, the planned build between London and Birmingham. What do you think that rail project was going to cost? How much is it going to cost? Give us a guess.
God, I have no idea. I mean, we're talking
Hundreds
billions.
of billions.
It's billions.
Yeah.
It's not hundreds of billions.
Tens of billions.
Tens of billions.
Yeah.
Go on, give us a tens of billions guess.
I don't know, 72 billion.
That's not far off.
I'll go
Right,
60
here we go.
then. Go on.
We're going to give you this. 60, 72, it was 66.6 billion. So I reckon that is two very good guesses there. So yeah, HS2 cost as much as 66.6 billion to build between London and Birmingham. That's according to new estimates shared by MPs. Now, the next one, the Rwanda scheme. Higher or lower? That's an easy one.
Oh, less than that.
It's definitely less than that.
Much.
Yeah, it was
much,
in the millions.
It's still quite a lot.
Yeah, in the millions, in the millions. How many millions do we think?
300 million.
It's more than 300 million?
Wow, I would have said it was about 300 million, actually. I didn't think it was more than that.
Higher than 300 million. The answer is 750 million spent on the Rwanda deportation scheme. That is a cost breakdown of the plan shown by the Home Office this year. So 750 million on Rwanda.
Which wasn't delivered.
No.
And 66 billion on HS2, which wasn't delivered.
Millennium Dome. Do you reckon it's higher or lower than that?
Lower inflation, surely. Sure, there's been a lot of inflation since
Going to be
then.
lower?
It was super expensive at the time and people talked about it. But yes, I would say it's lower than that.
Right, here we go. Millennium Dome, now known as the O2. 789. So it was more. It was more, only just though. Designed by Lord Richard Rogers, the dome was built at a cost of £789 million to house the Millennium Experience. Did either of you go?
I would have been 9 at the time, so I definitely did
I was
go,
a lot
yeah.
older, but I did not.
You're banned. You're not allowed on the show again. That's it. Garden Bridge project. Another thing that didn't happen.
Oh.
So this was the plan to build a bridge covered with trees and flowers over the River Thames. Was it more or less than the dome?
I think
hope it was less.
It was less.
Yeah, it was.
What do we reckon?
Were there figures of like 200 million brandished about for that?
It's less than that. Let's
10,
have a look.
20.
The cost was 53 million. Apparently it spent...
Small change compared to what we've been spending on other
$161,000 website and £417,000 on a gala for the abandoned project. And finally, what was the cost to rebrand the Department of Trade and Industry to the Department of Productivity, Energy and Industry in the early 2000s? What do we reckon?
It must have been less.
It was less.
Hundreds of thousands, please, if not less.
It was nearly £30,000.
Yeah.
Still quite a lot of money for a
Still lot of
rebrand.
money, yeah.
In the early 90s.
But the acronym was partly why they had to change it as well. I'm not even going to go there, but it was needed to do. That's all I'm going to say. Right, thank you very much indeed for being on the programme tonight. It's been great to have you here. That is it from us tonight. I will see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Matt Barbette, who I'm sure is going to have more for you on the farming project protest. And then, of course, the World with Yalda Hakeem at 9 p.m. this evening. I will see you tomorrow night. It's been great to have you both on the programme. Hopefully no more examples of government waste to update that chart from in the meantime. Have a great evening and I'll see you tomorrow.